All right, so my topic is from an article from called Chucklefish Responds to Allegations It Exploited Starbound Volunteers. And long story short, Chucklefish had a program set up where these teenage volunteers could come in and just get some experience at a game studio, and they wound up producing a good bit of content that was used in a game that wound up making Chucklefish a lot of money, and those volunteers were never compensated. Um, and we could get more in detail about that, but it's just kind of the standard operating procedure of the current cultural moment we find ourselves in, of companies using volunteer labor and not paying that volunteer labor and making money off of their efforts. So I know that was a very brief summary. Do you feel like I've left out anything important? That's essentially the story. These teenagers are now adults, and they're speaking out about what happened to them, and in their naivety, they allowed themselves to be taken advantage of, and now they are not pleased that happened. But this story stood out to me because of the discussion that you had, Luke, several weeks ago with Andrew on the show. And our different generation. I'm like 45, and Andrew's like 16. But just kidding. I hope you heard that, Andrew. But yeah, just this is kind of the way things are, and what are your initial reactions to this?
Yeah.
And given the perspectives of some of the young whippersnappers, do you think that this is actually defensible in any way? Was Chucklefish completely in the wrong to do this?
I used the same phrase last week in talking about a totally different situation with the sexual assault allegations that were taking place last week. But I said it is shocking, but I am not shocked. So there's something jarring about seeing somebody go on Twitter and say, I gave hundreds of hours of my life not to get coffee for the developers, not to set up the conference room, not to, work the front desk or anything like that, but to develop significant chunks of this game for these people and was not paid a dime for it. Like, when I think about free labor to get your foot in the door of somewhere, I think about like internships, and we can argue the validity of internships. But when you're doing internships, generally there is an educational aspect to it, and you are not expected to do the exact work of the people who you are interning under. Like, you may be given responsibilities within it, but you're never like just given like, hey, here's this thing, take it and run with it, like this is now yours kind of deal. And so the work that was being asked for was not volunteer internship level work. The work that was being asked here was seemingly employee level, like, you should be compensated for this kind of stuff.
And I don't know the situation years ago when this happened, but I know that today in most states there are actually laws that prohibit unpaid internships from including work that would normally be accomplished by an employee. So if you're currently in an internship where that's happening, you should consult your local laws and perhaps a lawyer.
Yeah, I guess my initial reaction was somewhat similar to Luke's. This seems to fall in line with what we've heard at other studios. The passionate workers whose passion is getting taken advantage of in an industry that seems to use passion and kind of use it to manipulate people and get them to do work way beyond their capacity. I do think, and maybe before we dive deeper into the story, you can read the statement from the developer, because I think the statement from the developer is quite interesting, based on how they're choosing to defend themselves in this case.
Yeah. Let's see. So here's a little bit of the statement. We're aware and saddened by the current allegations against Chucklefish regarding Starbound's early development. During this time, both the core crew and community contributors were collaborating via a chat room and dedicating their time for free. Community contributors were under no obligation to create content, work to deadlines, or put in any particular number of hours. Everyone was credited or remunerated as per their agreement. It's been almost a decade since Starbound's development first began, and from then Chucklefish has grown considerably into an indie studio that has a strong emphasis on good working practices, providing a welcoming environment for all employees and freelancers. Our doors remain open to any related parties who wish to discuss their concerns with us directly, end quote. And just since they referenced it, I didn't start early enough in the statement. The agreement that they're referring to is that all of these volunteers signed an agreement.
Yeah.
And signed away any rights to make money off of their work.
One thing I would be interested in this, and I don't think this is discussed in this article or the Polygon article, but they were 16 when they entered this agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Did a parent also sign off on these contracts that they were working under, or was this just something? Because you can't, as a minor, you can't sign a legally binding document with an organization. You have to have a parent or guardian sign that document as well. So I'd be interested to see that, like, because I think it's a little hard to say a 16-year-old signed their right to compensation away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much of this stuff that, because of the small startup nature of a lot of things in this industry, just go completely unregulated.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it often results in stuff like this, where like it's a lot of inexperienced people, or a lot of people who want to give other people experience, kind of interacting with each other, and results in a weird working environment where it's extremely informal and extremely casual to a fault. And I mean, this is a working environment. Work is being done, and a game is being created. There need to be, I mean, as much as you want to pretend like it's a laid-back startup environment, there does need to be process and procedure for this stuff, and this is why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having, and Cody, you're fully aware of this too. Like, having worked in the games writing space, this stuff is widespread there as well.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And I've talked about this very candidly, both on this show and on the Nightly Rundown, of where I was on both sides of this. I worked a lot for free for organizations that did not compensate me for my work. And then we did Two Left Sticks, where I led the place. I wasn't making a dime off of it, but I had individuals working under me who were volunteering their time as well for that project. And, you know, I've talked at length about how I recognize now that was improper and incorrect of me to pull people in who were not involved, who were not actually like going to yield any additional benefit for like building it from the ground up with me. Like, they didn't own the thing alongside me, bringing those people in to work for free. But this is just a common tactic, and the thing that is stated in the jobs like that I applied for and worked for free in the games writing space. And then it said, one of the graphic artists, Ro Watson, said it right here. He said, quote, "Put simply, it was either sign that contract and get your foot in the door or get out," end quote. And like, that's the rub. That's the carrot that they dangle in front of you. It's like, this is a way for you to break into the industry, and everybody at 16 is looking for a way to break into the industry for their dream job. And so, you know, throw caution to the wind, forget paying me. If this can get me a career in game development, I'm willing to jump at it. And we saw, I was one of those, you know, doe-eyed kids who jumped into roles into volunteer roles, thinking that, oh man, me writing for, you know, whatever fucking unknown website is my foot in the door to the industry. And it's just like, it was misrepresented and not really the case as to, like, yeah, you can build valuable experience there, but at the end of the day, nobody's going to look at it and be like, oh man, he wrote for this thing, or let's give him a job. Like, it's hardly a foot in the door in the industry in a lot of ways. This is maybe different, but we see this in game spaces all over the place. I brought up I'm looking for esports jobs, and so I go to Hitmarker Jobs a lot. They have a lot of volunteer positions there. I pulled up one of the jobs that was listed on there. It was no joke, a CFO position at a startup that required you to have an MBA and prior esports experience in order to. One of your responsibilities was to secure funds, and then the disclaimer at the bottom was recognize that this is a volunteer position until we are able to secure funds, at which point we will begin compensating you. And it's just like, that person had people applying for that job have fucking MBAs, master's degrees. They've been in college for 6 years and have experience in the esports industry, and they're not going to get paid a dime to be the CFO, a C-suite executive of a startup company.
Where this differentiates a little bit for me, so the two left sticks endeavor on this side of things, I think you're right, and I'm glad you've had the change of heart about how to approach these things. But we'd be having a very different conversation about two left sticks if it had like taken off and been really successful.
And I was I think, hoarding it and laying in it like a fucking dragon.
Right. And that's kind of how I feel about this situation. Like, okay, maybe Chucklefish like was just getting started and maybe they made some bad plays there at the beginning, but they wound up having a successful product. And I think the correct thing would have been to like go back and pay the people that made your product.
And I guess that is a little bit of a difference. In all of the job descriptions for people at Two Left Sticks, there was a compensation outline of like, when we start generating income, this is what you will make off of it. So there was a transparency that we're not here yet, but here's how you will begin to be compensated when we do get there, which was not the case here. So no. I agree with you, Larry.
Yeah, this is a lot more nefarious in my mind. So this stuff's everywhere, and it's terrible. I work with youth, and I'm old enough now that I've had waves of kids move from teen years to adult years, and I've just kind of been watching from a distance as this becomes more prevalent. Like, and I don't know if we have the answer I don't have the answer to this question. Maybe you guys do. But how did we get to the point where free labor is such a common thing, where this is like something that happens so much and is permitted to happen?
Well, we grow up in this late capitalism dystopia where we're given dream jobs, and you grow up not dreaming about what you want to accomplish, but about what you want to spend your 9 to 5 doing. And so you like romanticize this industry and this job, and you say, I will do whatever it takes in order to get this job, and companies recognize that. And so, and it's kind of drilled in your head early on that like, oh, you got to make sacrifices and you're going to have to spend some time working for free. Like, I've talked to people who have said like, oh, I don't expect to get paid in my field for the first 1.5 years, 2 years that I'm out from college, because I'm going to have to just be gaining experience. And like, that is not something that you come to arrive at on your own. That is something that corporate America, culturally ingrained, like, well, and it's more nefarious than culture. It is what companies want you to believe, that you have to surrender that much time and energy and effort for this like abstract idea of experience.
I think it's partly. Yeah, I think it's partly that. I think we've come to view labor as something not. I think in all aspects of life, we've been conditioned to think of labor as something that's not as valuable as it potentially could be, both for ourselves and for others. I think, I mean, just speaking from personal experience, I have spent 7 years in college. And I remember thinking, I'm going to get out of school with a master's degree and I'm going to work knowing I'm not going to earn a lot of money, gain experience so I can move to the next thing. There's just like, I mean, you could talk about the price of college. You could talk about the job market out there, how it's been kind of increased. First, you needed a bachelor's degree to get a great job. Now you need a master's degree to get a great job. Now you need a PhD. It's a combination of a lot of things. And I think especially in an industry that's driven by passion, there's just a lot of desperation. Like you said, Luke, we're now thinking about what we want to do for our 9 to 5, not kind of what we want. We think of our job as life, and not what we want out of life writ large. And so the dream job is a manifestation of that. I think in some cases to a good degree, because I think people are able to get a lot out of their job in a professional and personal way, but also to a detriment because it is literally your life. That is what a dream job is. It is your employment becoming all consuming and becoming a part of your life. So I don't know. I think the answer to why we got here is manifold. It's probably too much to answer in an hour and a half podcast.
That's cute that you think this show's an hour and a half long anymore.
True. But I think it's a complicated question, but I think it's also one that we're all asking ourselves in some aspects of our life. I ask myself that. I'm going to be honest, I don't get paid a whole lot of my job. It stresses me out. I put in a lot and I don't get paid a lot. But I knew that going into it. And in some ways it is, I mean, I do know I need to do that to move on to the next thing. I'm gaining experience over this next year or so. And I just knew that I had to do that. I was trained that way in college. I was trained that way prior to college. It's been kind of the message that was imparted to me by corporations, by the culture at large, and has been ingrained in my body and in my mind. And I can look at that and I can think about that consciously, but ultimately it is, I think, especially in this industry that I'm in, it is, you got to get your toes wet somehow.
Yeah. What? You guys can rein me in if you think I'm going too far here, but I really feel like the free internship it's essentially a modern form of indentured servitude more often than not. I'm playing on your hopes that if you move here, you do the work first, then later down the road, you're gonna start getting what you deserve. And although I said earlier, a lot of state laws prohibit an intern from doing work that would normally be accomplished by an employee, I'm familiar with a lot of different internship situations and a lot of different industries, and almost all of them involve the interns doing work that would normally be accomplished by an employee. Like that's even if those laws are on the books, they're not getting enforced. These things aren't purely educational. And I think there are a lot of industries that are benefiting from a free labor force. And it's just wrong. If someone's going to work for you, they should be paid. Something that I really respected about, well, not at the time, for me, like, this issue wasn't on my radar as a college student. And that's just because I was oblivious to many things, but not that it wasn't an issue back then. But in retrospect, I really appreciate about the school that I went to. You had to find an internship that was paid. They expected that, and I took one that was not, but not because no one offered it to me. No one pursued me for that purpose. There was somebody that I really respected and wanted to learn from, and so I sought special permission from the school to intern under that guy while also working a job. But even in that situation, the church that I interned at wound up taking up a love offering, which is a fancy way of saying, "We'll pass a plate and everyone appreciates you. Here's some money," and it was significant. So essentially, my unpaid internship became pretty well paid. It didn't quite meet minimum wage for what I did, but it was paid. And I don't understand how people are making the ends meet. Well, I guess I do. They're essentially working multiple full-time jobs, and that can't be good for the internship actually accomplishing the purpose of them learning the things that they need to learn.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I went to a school renowned for its co-op program, Northeastern. That's what it bills itself as. It essentially bills itself as, you go to school, you not only get to earn money during school because you're doing all these sweet paid internships that the school helps you find. Essentially, they have a network of employers they work with to get people hired in their given field. You come out with all this actual work experience that you're able to apply what you're learning in the classroom to that. Granted, not all of the positions are paid, but the majority of them are. But that's an anomaly for a lot of schools. And I think the collegiate system is also plays a large part in this, because oftentimes a lot of schools won't let you work a part-time or full-time job while you're doing an internship. There are actually restrictions against that. So you are actually paying a lot of money to do an unpaid internship.
Like teachers, when they do their student
yeah.
teaching, they're not allowed to take other jobs.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, my girlfriend was talking about this to me the other day. But there, and I think that breeds a sort of mentality about how much your labor is worth. I think a large problem in the games industry, both on the developer side and, as you were talking about, Luke, the writer side, is I don't think people understand how much their work is worth.
Yeah.
I would always encourage writers who are starting out to understand what your work is worth. And you might think that you don't really have that leverage or that power when you're starting out, but you do. You deserve to be paid for your work. If you're putting in the time and effort to make it something worthwhile. And I think the collegiate system, to me, kind of distorts that in a really disturbing way. Luckily, I went to a school where that wasn't the case, but I have heard plenty of horror stories about, like, I have to work this unpaid internship that is essentially a full-time job, and I can't work anywhere else to be able to pay the bills and pay my tuition or pay my college loans, and I'm just essentially going into indentured servitude even further. You're just digging a hole for yourself.
Yeah. And as far as your work being worth something, at the end of the day, if somebody is making if somebody is making money off of your work, then you should be seeing a share of that.
Yes.
That's bottom line.
Especially in something this successful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you're not, someone is taking advantage of it. And Luke, so I've learned a lot of things vicariously through you and your career pursuits. But as a business owner, like when you started a business, like that was kind of different. The three of you had a share in that company.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you had employees on, like they had to get their checks regardless of how you guys were doing.
Yeah.
And so if someone is like growing their business off of your work, then there should be conversations about your share of things if this thing does take off. Just protect yourself. Don't let yourself be taken advantage of. But I don't know how realistic that is. Which transitions to the last thing I kind of want to bring up. What will it take to change this aspect of our culture? We can limit it to gaming if you want, but it's all over the place. Or is it even possible where we're at? Do you guys see any avenue for changing this situation?
I think there is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I think there are systemic things that are going to definitely need to be addressed. But I think there's two really interesting things happening in the startup career phase. The first is apprenticeship, and this is happening more in like labor industries and stuff like that are requiring specialized skills, but they're still more like traditional 9-to-5 jobs. But and it's sort of like the co-op program with Northeastern, where like, hey, we're partnering with employers who will pay, but in these apprenticeships, these employers are paying for you to go to school and paying you a salary to work at their factories or whatever in order to learn the skills to. They're creating their own workforce, with specialized skills for themselves, and they're paying the price for it. And I think that's really interesting. But that's more of a result of the fact that I think those positions are getting harder and harder to fill because more and more people are like, well, I want to move to New York and be on Broadway. But I think that is a cool thing that I'm hoping will have an effect in more areas than just kind of like the traditional 9-to-5 labor industries. But the second thing is just we live in a world today where it is more viable than ever to create something for yourself and actually make a living off of it. And I think about like not our generation and not even the generation after us, but the generation after them, like my 9-year-old nephew, and the internet literacy that these kids have and the ideas that even my 9-year-old nephew has of like what he would want to do on Twitch or what he would want to do on YouTube. And like, he's got creative ideas already thinking about those things. And the more he learns the skills to execute on them and develops the business acumen to like monetize it, like that generation is going to be very successful in creating small, because right now, like, hey, you get 500 people who really like your content on Twitch, you can be savvy enough to monetize that in a way to make it work for you. And so the more that like we break the chains of our dependence on companies and corporations to employ us and give us a check, the better. And the more avenues we have to become creators of our own and build our own thing, I think it's going to impact changing those ways. And so, and I think that it'll also help people to recognize the value of their work when they're spending their young adult, their adolescent lives building something for themselves and seeing how much effort and energy it takes. They're going to place more value on the energy they're putting into things for a company as well.
Yeah, I think to the latter point, there's certainly some problematic elements that come from a largely self-employed workforce as well. I think there are benefits to working in a work environment that is somewhat structured and like has established rules and well, for lack of a better word, ethics. I'm just thinking of
Absolutely.
the stuff that happened recently with the Crime Junkies podcast, which like frustrated me to no end. Like that is a world that the podcast world is not unlike the streaming world, in that it's a lot of people just deciding to start something up, and the rules and regulations surrounding it are still, it's pretty much like the Wild West. So plagiarism is still relatively rampant when it comes to true crime stuff. But I think addressing the games industry, it's interesting because I think for all the talk about unionization and all the stories coming about crunches and labor abuses, contract work, which is ostensibly what this was, is not an issue that's really been tackled, and I think it's one that still a lot of companies fail to address adequately, and still take advantage of. I mean, that was part of the Rockstar story, the way they were treating their contractors. It was part of the Call of Duty story, I believe, as well. But I think the more this stuff is covered and the more it comes to light, and I think the more networks that are created as the industry grows, because I think there's definitely a strong contracting community within games. There is certainly something that I'm becoming more and more aware of. There's certainly a strong freelance community within games press. There's a really strong network of writers that kind of work together to educate each other. It's a community that's very supportive of one another, and that'll only become stronger as games press kind of becomes more recognized and more established. I guess I see less concrete change that has been made in the industry. And while I do have, I think you are right, Luke. I think there are coming waves in terms of how employment operates that I think will change things. I still have not seen much movement in the games industry on this front. As much as it's been covered, I still have not seen much improvement.
I'm curious about the future of education as far as how that plays into this as well, because that's a big problem. Is there's these swelling education costs, and my education requires me to have an internship, but I'm not allowed to work, or I think, I don't see how the current cost of education is sustainable, and I think that's going to come to a head soon and affect all this in some way. But as far as making the change, I think you're right to highlight because if that issue doesn't start getting tackled with the same tenacity that these other labor issues are getting tackled with, it'll be really easy for companies to just shuffle the abuses into the contract work for the short term.
And in an industry that is largely that sees so much turnover as it is and is largely contractor driven, it's only more and more of a problem.
Mm-hmm. But I also just have faith that if we get people beginning to run their companies in ways that aren't abusive, I fully believe that those companies will find success in that. I think that human beings who are like happy and positive and satisfied and not overworked produce better products than those who are not. You know, maybe this is silly optimism, but you know, there are companies that are renowned for, and people want to be at those companies, and I just hope some of these other companies start like understanding that and maybe following that kind of example. Yeah. So, you know, there's probably not anyone listening to this podcast in that position, but on the off chance that there is, like, give it a shot.
Yeah. Well, and people more and more realize, leaders at these companies are more and more realizing, like, culture is more than just we have a ping pong table and a monthly company outing. You know, like, they're realizing that culture is about other things as well. And I mean, even the Chucklefish response, a part of it talked about, like, we've grown as a company in the last decade, and, you know, really focus on having a healthy workplace. Doesn't change the fact that they haven't righted their wrong, but you know, companies are becoming more and more aware of what it means to have good culture.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have one last question, and here's the cynic in me. Do you think that it's actually possible for the younger people right now to draw that line and to refuse to work for free, or are they trapped in a system that won't allow progression?
I think for now you're trapped in for right now. Like when we're talking about people that are Andrew's age, you know, in your early 20s, like those kinds of people for right now are going to have to probably just grin and bear the system that is. And then hopefully what happens is those people who have been exploited and recognize the exploitation that's happened get into roles where they can make the changes trickle down. So
yeah, there's just too much between education and corporate culture. There's just too many systemic forces weighing down, especially on our generation, for it can seem hopeless.
And the fact that if you don't take it, there's 40 other people behind you that will. Yeah,
and they're relying on that fact.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a certain amount of feeling trapped, but I also think it's also not an excuse not to work your ass off and get your money. Mm-hmm. Get that money.
That's right.
Let's go get that bread.
Yeah.